you'll see ETH is the underdog once again. Like the takes that I'm seeing on Twitter are like nation state level FUD. But that's kind of what you need. You need your coin to get beaten down to the point where it's the underdog and it's just a death march. And once you're on the death march, it's like fuck the price. Like we're just going to keep putting one foot in front of the other, and that's when cool things happen.
All right, everyone. We will be back to the program in just a moment. But before we do, I want to share something that Blockworks has been cooking up for these last couple of months. March of this coming year in London, Blockworks is hosting DAS London, the largest institutionally focused conference in all of crypto. Goldman, JP Morgan, Point72, all in one room so you can know what the big money is doing. So click the link at the bottom of this episode. It'll take you right over to the homepage and use BELL20 for 20% off. And I will see you in sunny London town in March.
All right, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Bell Curve. Before we jump in, quick disclaimer. The views expressed by my co-host today are their personal views, and they do not represent the views of any organization with which the co-hosts are associated with. Nothing in the episode is construed or relied upon as financial, technical, tax, legal, or other advice. You know the deal. Now, let's jump into the episode.
All right, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Bell Curve. We got Michael's 1 and 2 and Vance for our special end of year predictions episode. Fellas, pumped for this one.
These are fun.
Oh, yeah.
These are a blast. These are good. Maybe it makes sense to start this one off by just going back, and we did one of these last year at the end of the year, and we should kind of score ourselves here on.
I was going to say, typically these prediction episodes are just like, let's throw anything out and like there's no retribution whatsoever. And so let's hold ourselves in check here. Let's see how we did.
All right. I think that's a good idea. Very high integrity move of us to do. All right. Let's start with Vance's predictions here. So ZK EVMs disappoint. Those things take longer to come out. I would score that as correct overall. What do you think? I think the optimistic rollups are still in the driver's seat, and I feel like we're still waiting on a lot of the ZK stuff.
I was looking at it last night. Polygon ZK EVM has had a total of 13,000 transactions.
I think it's just like it's weird. The ZK EVMs, I guess ZK Sync has had like a lot of transactions because people are like farming the airdrop, kind of mercenary like. But I would say next year is what we think will be a breakout year for ZK EVM, just because Immutable X is launching their ZK EVM alongside Passport, and like, I think like generally one prediction that I have and Michael has, and probably you too, Mike Ippolito, is the second one of these platforms gets like 1 million users, like the ground can really shift beneath people's feet in terms of like, oh, is it like Solana or Near, or is it like Immutable with like a shitload of gaming users? And so maybe we'll save the prediction, but I still think ZK EVM is going to have a nice year next year, just because like it's becoming the platform of games on the EVM at least.
Yeah, save the prediction. I think this is probably not right in 2023, but probably correct in 24.
Yeah. Well, I think that was your point as well. It was just like sort of a pattern matching thing of this is obviously going to be huge, but it's just going to take a little bit longer than everyone is expecting. Everyone was kind of pricing it in like it was going to be huge this year, which it wasn't. Okay. Visa and MasterCard will build out feature-rich payment rails. I would also score that as I don't really know about MasterCard, but I feel like Visa leaned in pretty big this year, like just in terms of they're doing really interesting stuff around account abstraction. I feel like maybe they haven't rolled out a ton of stuff yet, but I do feel like they leaned in. So
in September, they had their partnership announcement with USDC and Circle, where they would start settling transactions in USDC. The announcement of the partnership, who knows how long the activation will take, but I'd say, at least from a PR perspective, that's a win.
Yeah. We can score that we can score this a half point there. All right. These next two are interesting. So these are both L2's L2 predictions. So 1 point and L2 might blow up. We haven't had that happen yet, but things are looking a little riskier on some of the some of the L2 fronts. So you might have just been a little early on that prediction. We'll still see. Maybe score that as a half point too. And then there won't be a L1 with more TVL than an L2. Which I would actually, again, score that on a half point, because I think TVL, some of the alt L1s did fall pretty drastically in TVL, but there are some other L1s today that have more TVL than L2s. So maybe not as much on that one.
Solana, I'm guessing, is the one.
Solana, yeah, I think Avalanche as well, actually, but yeah, Solana reflipping some of the L2s.
Half point.
Yeah, half point, baby. All right, Michael. I actually think Michael gets the my personal award for best prediction, which was broad Bitcoin cohort comes together to realize that we need to change course, which is that we didn't get exactly how this was going to happen. We didn't call the nifties, but I think that was a really interesting prediction that played out in a pretty interesting way. But I would call that a win. I actually thought that kind of ended up being the best prediction of the bunch.
Well, didn't know how it had happened, but I knew it would happen. But yeah, I mean, inscriptions, I think, are like by far the biggest transaction type that's happening on the Bitcoin network right now. And Bitcoin is hitting all-time highs in terms of fee transactions going through the network. We were talking about this a bit before the show, but like all the different, meme coins, dogs with hats, dogs without hats, frogs, ordinals, BRC20s. I think people are just, looking to farm and looking to have fun. We'll save it for later, but there is sort of a second part to this, which is that translates into actual value. I'd say we have yet to kind of see how that will play out yet, but moving in the right direction for the Bitcoin network.
I think this is a nice. We'll have a category later of feel good story. This for me could have fit in the feel good story because I think I personally love Bitcoin and a lot of the arguments that community makes really resonates with me. But I do feel like it was co-opted by pretty extreme. I would characterize it as religious viewpoints. So it's cool to see a resurgence of something that looks a little bit more normal and a little bit less cat eatery as a vibe. So. And then Michael, you actually had fewer predictions here, but your other one was DeFi versus CeFi activity flippening. So you said there was going to be a flippening. It wasn't going to be the one we necessarily expected, but there's going to be more on-chain activity than sort of CeFi activity moving forward. How do you feel like that one played out?
I don't think it hit yet, but I think it's definitely trending in the right direction. It's tough having the timing element of all of these be a year. Everything in software always takes longer than you expect, right? But I think we're definitely heading in the direction of DeFi overtaking CeFi. And maybe I'll just kick the can down the road and push it into 24 as the timeline to do it.
Yeah. I think in some areas though, like we've talked about the NFT exchanges. I mean, that feels like a pretty drastic flippening right there. So maybe it didn't happen in the centralized versus decentralized spot markets that we were looking for, but I feel like there are definite parts that ended up playing out.
And there's a ton of stuff coming out on the decentralized perps, decentralized derivatives that I think will make a pretty sizable change in 24.
Yeah, I agree. All right. So the predictions that I had were L1 survive and thrive, which I do think has played out largely in Solana world. But I think you'll see some, like one of my predictions for this coming year has to do with like Monad. I think you're going to continue to see new L1s launch and do pretty well, but I think a lot of the other ones will probably die and fade into irrelevance.
Yep.
MEV emerges as the dominant business model in crypto. I think that was just an ill-formed prediction, to be honest. I don't really feel like it's the dominant business model in crypto, although I do feel like it was a huge theme of this year. And I think there's going to be, if I could go back and reword that, I would say it would be a redistribution of MEV away from proposers today to back to applications and users. So I think there was a lot of focus on MEV this year, but I don't think it emerged as the dominant business model in crypto. Equities have further to go, but crypto bottomed. So called the bottom in crypto. That said, equities were still going to go down. So I would call that a half right, but probably wrong because I was just wrong on the idea generally there. But the December 2022 was the bottom in crypto. And then the rise of specialized guilds that will provide labor to DAOs. This one, that was kind of an out there weird prediction. I don't think it's happened yet, but I do end up it is a huge problem for DAOs still. They have to find a way to source labor in a more efficient, sort of scored way than they're doing it right now. We actually tried to do something like this with the Arbitrum Coalition, which is in the process of getting reformed, but I think that'll be something going forward. So I don't know, fellas. I feel like predictions are always hard. That was can I give us a 50% hit rate? that feels
It was also during FTX and stuff. I think we get points for just like believing, like we joke
I agree.
about a lot of like sometimes this job, especially like, yours too, because you got to stay convicted. Like it tests your courage more than your intelligence quite a lot.
Yeah.
So just stay bullish, even when it looks bad like last year, you can still kind of see the future to some extent. And it's not terrible most of the time.
No. I think going into 2024, I'm more optimistic than I've been in some time. I feel really excited about the catalyst that we have on the horizon, but also also there's so much cool stuff that's coming out in the next 6 months. We'll get into some of that with predictions, but like I feel really good going to 24.
So I think we've talked about for this episode, we're gonna do ecosystems, then we'll do themes, then we'll do like, best, worst, comeback, rookie of the year, whatever you want to call it.
Most improved.
Most improved. Yeah. I don't even know who most improved would go to. Certainly not SBF or Do Kwon or any of those people. But I think we should probably start with just like 2024. What do we think? New year, potentially new us.
I mean,
what happened?
New us.
Same old us, for sure.
Yeah.
My general sentiment about 2024 is we have dismantled all the bad actors and put them away. We have the right foot moving in the right direction in terms of positive crypto trajectory. And we've got macro headwinds turning into tailwinds over the next 12 months. And we've said this, externally to folks, we've said this internally to people that we talk to, but I think we're at the first inning of the next bull market over the next couple of years. I think 2024 will be the representation of the broader realization of that, where we don't start having normie fervor, but we do start having normie realization of what is happening. And what I mean by this as an anecdote, if you were to poll 10 of my friends, not people in crypto, but just people that I'm friends with outside of crypto, I guarantee you 7 of them would still think that Bitcoin price was below 10K or somewhere in that range. And I think nobody has been paying attention to what's happened over the last 3, 4, 5 months. And 2024 will be a realization of that for most people.
I think that's right. I mean, it's funny the extent to which normies are not engaged at all. And like you kind of forget that like it takes that all-time high break to get everyone back in the pool fully. And, just like at the end of last year, everyone was like really pessimistic and that set the stage for optimism. I think everyone's optimistic this year and that sets the stage for like, a Bitcoin ETF. Like we've hyped this thing so much that like almost anything under like $10 billion of inflows in the first like few months is going to be like kind of a letdown. And so it feels like it could be a choppier year. And to me, it's just like the analogy is very clean. Like this year was kind of like 2019. Next year is 2020, and 2020 was full of like, we had COVID, we had like the 70% crash, then we had like the melt up, and you have the halvening, you have the potential new Trump election or Trump administration, but like it does feel like the end of the year is kind of when everything comes to pass. And just talking with like people with like Eigenlayer and Monad and like a lot of games, like I think people are going to be surprised how much stuff launches in the first or second quarter of the year, but like there's a lot coming in Q4 on like the real work being delivered side. So, Kobe posted on Twitter or like liked some, tweet about like how the cycle is going to be much shorter and like we're going to top right before the ETF. I think it's going to be a lot longer. Because if we have like this paradigm shift of regulation, like 2024 to 2028 are open season. So it'll be a mixed bag, is my prediction.
Yeah, I think it's always very tough to predict what the market is going to do on like a 3 to 6 month sort of time horizon. I feel like there were kind of two options available to us, which was going to be, I feel like the time you maybe could have gotten a little bearish if like the market had just totally melted up all time high before the ETF, which probably isn't going to happen now, but that looked like it was in the cards even a month ago, and that was probably the time to say we got way out ahead of our skis. I think the longer we sort of tread water and chop, and if the ETF isn't a huge, if there isn't some sort of parabolic spike after, then I agree. I think it's going to get drawn out more. I could see it sort of going either way, but I do think just based on everything that's launching this coming year, and I don't know, just intuition, I feel like if you're not trying to trade on like a monthly sort of basis, I feel like there's very little risk that we're not going to be in a better spot at the end of 2024 than we are today. So I go in optimistic.
Yep.
Although uncertain about how it plays out in principle, So, well, we were talking about this like one, because one thing that so we're looking at these meme coins, right? There's a dog with a hat, and that's up 1,000,000% in the last couple of weeks, and there's an avalanche one, and all these things. But so on the one hand, that feels really toppy, but on the other hand, we're still so far off the highs. I mean, we're still like over 50% off all-time highs in many of these coins. So I kind of just keep coming back to like we've got so much more room to run here.
I mean, I think the people that are tracking that and saying this feels like fervor, this feels like top, blah blah blah. I think the only counterpoint to that perspective is these are people who are taking like $1,000 and turning it into 100 grand. You try to turn 1 million into 100 million in those markets, like you're not. Good luck. And so I think all that this really signals is that animal spirits for some small portion of retail is back. But it's like if you want to play with real size, like let's talk about the real markets. Let's not talk about these tiny little things that pop and then drop. And in those large markets, we were talking about this too, Mike. But whatever the signal is that Willy Woo wants to talk about, like that signal
MVRV
is it's basically at 1.37. The only times that it's gone above 3 have been good times to sell, and we are well away from that. So I think we're just starting in terms of the real markets. These small little things are just canaries in the coal mine for what's to come.
I also think there's an element of PTSD here, and it's very difficult to get yourself, crypto goes through extreme euphoria and periods of extreme depression. And it's actually very difficult, even having gone through that a couple times, to mentally reorient yourself if you've been experiencing 2 years of max pain to be really hopeful. And then the same thing on the other side, when things have been going extremely well, to say, hey, our revenue is probably going to go down 60, 70%. That's just a really tough mental pill to swallow at that time. So I do feel like actually in bull markets, the biggest mistake that people make is letting go of your winners too early. And like everyone has these stories about how they sold way too early. And I don't know. I know I'm sounding a little hopium-esque, but that's where my head's at, honestly, going into this year.
I think people are most concerned with upside maximization versus downside minimization. And that's just like, a sentiment barometer of where things are. And people are going to be tested all throughout 2024. Nothing's free. And you're going to have to go through some nights where you're not sleeping so well. It's all part of the process.
All part of the fun. All right, let's go. Let's move on to some of the specific ecosystems. Bitcoin, how are you guys feeling about it in 2024?
Definitely comeback year this year.
Yeah. Definitely comeback year. I think now that we've got sort of two camps, which is the like ordinals and inscriptions, Taproot, like there's functionality within the Bitcoin ecosystem, or at least there's the potential of it. I think you've got that as one side of it. And then you've got the hardliner, like hard money, digital gold, institutionalization, inflation hedge. Don't touch my Bitcoin. Don't mess with it. Don't pump the fees through it. Don't clog the network. You've got that side of the camp as well. And I will be very curious to see what happens with the institutionalization. It seems like, at this point, 95, 98% chance that it gets the ETF approval in early January. And then, everybody and their mother is going to just get bombarded with advertising for Bitcoin. And everybody's going to know about it. It's like, I don't know if you've walked through airports recently, but you've got even, SFO. We were in Hawaii recently for my brother's wedding, and they've got, even GBTC advertisements there. It's crazy. Like, but imagine that. And there's 12 participants, and one of those participants is the largest asset manager in the world. So I think everybody's going to know about it by the end of the year. But it will have to really go through a process of what is Bitcoin now, because there are two, pretty legitimate camps. And you've got the institutions on one side. This is digital gold. This is an asset category now. And then the other side, you've got, this is a tech platform where we could do things other than just hold assets.
Yep. I think someone described inscriptions to me as the blockchain version of an STD, and all these different blockchains are like catching it. And so, like, I just, it's awesome to see them hit all-time highs in terms of fees. Again, it doesn't mean quite as much because it's a proof of work system, but like proving the sustained demand of what's going on, and like, putting the Luke Dash Jr., like, I'm going to eradicate this spam from the blockchain FUD to bed, like, kind of feels like where Bitcoin is going to go. But it's interesting. Like, this is the spot ETF is the final boss. Like, it's got to be kind of like roll your own catalyst from here on out. So it'll be interesting to see, but I think Bitcoin continues to do well in 2024.
Yep. I don't have much to add to what you guys said. I just wouldn't fade Bitcoin right before it's about to get its spot ETF. Just super left bell curve. I just think it's probably going to do well. There are a lot of arguments. Like, this always kind of comes up, the Bitcoin camp, about whether Bitcoin's going to flip this trend of the last couple cycles and start to outperform ETH or Solana or some of the newer chains. I'd probably go out on a limb and say I don't think that's going to happen. I think the same period that has held in the past is going to continue to hold. So even though it's going to be a great year for Bitcoin, I would say, and that's kind of the destiny of all these L1s, right? Like, the bigger you get, the less volatile you get, the more your absolute returns are going up, but risk adjusted looks a little better because it's de-risked. And that's just kind of the destiny of all of these really large assets over time.
So if we were to actually make a prediction here, just based off of what we've been talking about, I think we would all probably agree, but like, who wins in those two camps? Is it the institutions and, the hard money perspective, or is it, the inscriptions and the experimental BRC camp?
Institutional for me.
100%.
I would say institutional. Also, like, you look at the user numbers on a lot of these things, and it kind of looks like the same cohort of people who are trading like the dog coins. It's like 50 people versus like 50 other people. And inscriptions, like, you can really ramp the fees. So, like, we'll see, if it doesn't sustain, I think you fall kind of naturally back into this, like, it's digital gold. That's all it is.
Agreed. Yeah.
Should we do?
All right,
should we do ETH?
Yeah, I would love to get your guys' perspective. And just to set the scene here, I mean, the narrative has shifted a little bit against Ethereum. I would say, kind of shifted from this super consensus bet to one that's, I don't think it's really a total underdog. Like, it's still the second biggest crypto, but like, the narrative has certainly shifted against it.
No,
Probably,
it's the underdog now.
Yeah, it's the underdog. Yeah, I'd just be curious, like, how are you guys thinking about the ETH ecosystem going into 24?
This is like very similar to what happened in 2019, where ETH BTC started the year at 0.04, and about in the middle of the year, I think it was in July or August, it was 0.16. So it had like a 50 to 70% decline. And, that was when Udi held the Death of ETH Twitter Spaces party. And literally, I just retweeted this guy saying, we're witnessing the death of Ethereum. And so, like, we're kind of there. And I think what you're going to see from ETH next year is kind of like twofold. Number one, I think you're going to see some sort of solution to the Ethereum alignment problem through things like restaking. And that's going to be kind of like, just like the ETH devs came out with ETH 2.0 during the last bear market in 2019, like, you're going to see a response from the L2 teams, from the application level builders, and also from the EF. And we've heard that the EF is kind of like interested in repositioning ETH as money, and kind of like, you emphasizing that property. And so like, I think just like you saw a lot of the Bitcoin community come together, you're probably going to see some of that from Ethereum as well. And then I think just the really like, and we can talk about Solana in this context, but like staking is one of the killer use cases of crypto. And seeing, like things like Blast and things like restaking driving additional ETH to be staked, like we could see the ETH staking rate at like 50%. And like at that point, the community is extremely aligned. Like, you're yield farming crazy APY Ponzi's with your ETH. And like the thing that we're trying to help with Jito with is like getting Sol stake and getting people to use Sol. Like ETH does not have that problem right now. And so you'll see higher fees, you'll see kind of like an aligned response, and you'll see ETH as the underdog once again. Like the takes that I'm seeing on Twitter are like nation state level FUD. But that's kind of what you need. You need your coin to get beaten down to the point where it's the underdog and it's just a death march. And once you're on the death march, it's like, fuck the price. Like, we're just going to keep putting one foot in front of the other. And that's when cool things happen. Like, think about Jito just building for the past like 2.5 years, just eating glass. People, including myself, being like, Solana might be dead. That's kind of what you want.
Totally agree with all of that. The additional flavor that I'd add is Dan Kuhn, which is the upgrade that's supposed to happen in Q1, 4844 reduces call data cost by 90% for L2s built on Ethereum. There are tens of portfolio companies that we have or that we're talking with about this who are looking to launch their own app chain that frankly cannot right now because they're waiting for Dan Kuhn to come in. And this is the major difference of like, it costs, $2,000 or $3,000 a day to like $200 or $300 a day to run the infrastructure. It's like a real material cost for some of these, cost constrained companies, protocols. And so I think the proliferation of the app chains post Dan Kuhn is also one of the reinvigorating narratives that will come about. And, it's a couple months away. It's not that far in 2024. But I think, yes, it has a slight narrative void right now. It's also in the opposition to basically everything that's launching right now or raising right now or announcing their raises right now. And so it's sort of, it is, it all ebbs and flows in crypto narrative land. And right now it's a flow or an ebb, whatever the opposite would be. But I think that changes pretty quickly with the launch of, probably hundreds of L2s as app chains.
Yeah, I agree with what both of you guys have said. And I would just reiterate to folks that this is sort of what happened actually in 2020. It was like Bitcoin dominance actually went up for a while, well into the run, and Bitcoin led and ETH would follow, and then ETH eventually started leading. This is just a really good reminder of how price leads narrative, I think, and people have drastically overstated the death of Ethereum. Actually, you sort of front ran one of my predictions, actually two of my sort of predictions, Vance, but that's interesting to hear that the Ethereum, I thought this was going to be an out there prediction, but I think Ethereum is going to get a rebrand away from ultrasound money this year. That was going to be one of my big predictions. I was never a huge fan of the ultrasound money because I felt like that is competing with Bitcoin, but I just think people are very bullish on restaking, but they don't really aren't grokking the full implications of that. And I think one of the things that ETH does best is actually yield. I'm totally with you on the staking piece. And, ETH, I think, has very secure block space. People want to hold their assets on the L1 and stake and get yield. That solves a huge problem that Bitcoin can't compete with. Bitcoin it's not a productive asset. And this is the reason why most institutions don't hold gold. It's not productive. ETH has the ability to be productive, and you can keep your assets on the L1, but earn incremental yield elsewhere in crypto through restaking. I just think that's such a powerful primitive. And I don't know if this will actually happen, but I would love to see the narrative reform around ETH as I don't know, like a productive yield bearing asset. I think that would be extremely powerful, differentiated, and fix a huge part of the problem that, like, when I talk to my dad, he still says this about Bitcoin. It's not productive. It's like gold.
Just sits
Okay.
there.
Yeah, it just
So
sits there. But
Let me read one thing. So I was reading this Eigenlayer blog post this morning, and I thought it was just like a good summation of kind of like that thesis. Um, in 2021, Sriram Khan, Kanan loved Ethereum. However, ETH was limited because apps had to be built within the Ethereum virtual machine. Um, Eigenlayer now enables Ethereum validators to secure arbitrary programs not running on the Ethereum blockchain. You no longer need to bootstrap a decentralized network to run a decentralized program. Like, I don't, maybe ultrasound money isn't the right way to put it, but like ETH is going to become the first asset to transcend its virtual machine and consensus layer. And that's like a totally new vision of like what is ETH. And it's just like super cool. And like if you think about the evolution of a blockchain and like kind of like let's just take Solana right now. You know, the first thing is like you kind of need people to like get like an LST that's bootstrapped, you know, secure the network with mostly LSTs. And then like I think the eventual hope for all these crypto assets is like we can use those validators and take them and do other things. But like all these blockchains need to still make progress outside of ETH on liquid staking. And that's going to be kind of like something that ETH has already checked the box on is like, cool, what else can we use this asset for? In the same way that you're describing it. And we denominate a lot of our fund in ETH because not only does it trend the market, you know, have yield, you can use it on APY stuff. You can borrow against it for 4% on Maker. You can swing it around onto different chains and LP with it. Like it's the only asset you can do that with still. And so that's kind of the money use case. Maybe that's not the right way to think about it though. Yeah.
it's just one other thing there too is like Bitcoin's done this many times. Bitcoin gets a new narrative ish every cycle, right? Like, and a lot of people knock it. It's like, oh, a man for every season. I don't think that is true. I just think we've invented something new. We've invented this new commodity called block space, and we inherently try to jam it into like it's money or it's an internet bond. It's like it's just a useful thing. It's just a useful thing. And that's what ETH is. It's a super useful thing. And I think it's about to get a redefinition of why people find it useful. And it has a moneyness in that people want to hold it, but then you can also get all this extra incremental yield. And it actually solves a massive problem for purchasers of security. I'm front running an episode that I just recorded with Sriram and Zaki, but I remain extremely excited about this.
Last one on ETH. I think we're going to see a supply squeeze at some point. All the staking, all the ETH that's been burnt. I think once demand returns for real, you're going to see the net effects of the past couple of years take shape.
So one of my predictions for 24 is that we see an ETH spot ETF.
I agree with that.
And so I think that's one of the catalysts, obviously, for demand. Narrative will probably front run that. But I agree with the supply shock, especially, and it'll be emphasized based off of the demand shock that's pulling it forward.
All right, everyone. We will be back to the program in just a moment. But before we do, I want to share something that Blockworks has been cooking up for these last couple of months. March of this coming year in London, Blockworks is hosting DAS London, the largest institutionally focused conference in all of crypto. We are gathering 1,200 of the world's largest asset managers. So think TradFi macro funds, crypto native funds, big allocators, and financial institutions. So banks, payment processors, etc., all in one spot. It's very rare to get the likes of Goldman, JP Morgan, Point72, whatever, all in one room, so you can know what the big money is doing. We're diving into the themes that they care about. So we're talking about the intersection of macro and crypto, where we are in the cycle, real world assets, so everything from stable coins to on-chain treasuries to tokenized assets. It's going to be a blast. But the other reason you really want to go is London, baby. Center of the world at one point. You got pub culture, you got fish and chips, great beer. It's going to be a blast. So because you're such great listeners to Bell Curve, there's a code BELL20 that's going to get you 20% off. So click the link at the bottom of this episode. It'll take you right over to the homepage. You'll see all of our speakers and use BELL20 for 20% off. Ticket prices are going up soon. Make sure you go use that code. I will see you in sunny London town in March. All right. Should we move on to Solana? Big year for Solana. Underdog story of the year, probably, although it's very hyped at the current moment. What do you guys think going into 2024?
Obviously the underdog winner of 2023. I mean, think about where it started. It was like post FTX. This time last year, I don't think SBF had been arrested. Um, but
I think he
He's
may
probably
have.
talking at the New York Times summit.
I mean,
That was a weird time.
exactly. It's like day by day, so who knows the timelines? Yeah, I mean, listen, they win the narrative. They win the comeback story of the year. I think it was also pretty bleak for the most of last year, of most of 2023. If we kind of forget, but like in June, it went back down to $8 and has been on a tear since. And I think Breakpoint was sort of the catalyst for a lot of this new narrative build. And there's some pretty interesting stuff going on. There's some projects, protocols that are taking the SVM and not using Solana as a settlement layer. I think there's a lot of things that are building interesting applications on top of it. I would say in 2024, my prediction is, so I think the biggest thing that Solana lacks right now is that um, it has all of the hype, but it doesn't have the distinct narrative definition of why. In 2019, if this is the equivalent, you could kind of see where things were trending with DeFi. And you had a ton of new protocols that were launching and kind of scaling at the end of 2019. And then, it took another 6 months, but then we had DeFi summer in 2020, summer 2020. And that was all, Ethereum, obviously. Um, I think it's unclear right now what that new kind of application category that Solana will own and what it will be. And so my prediction is that we find that out in 2024.
I think Solana is going to continue to do well in 2024. I don't have many. I think it's going to. I guess I have a couple long-term thoughts about it. It has this advantage right now over one of the disadvantages of L1 or L2s and actually Cosmos as well that we'll get to is interoperability. Like we haven't solved this like fragmentation of liquidity and haven't solved perfect interop, at least for ETH L2s. And the UX for Cosmos I still find pretty tough. So I think Solana has a leg up on UX in the current moment. What I think they are going to struggle with is they need to fully overhaul their fee market. Like they haven't, like the local fee market is a very cool first step, but in its current implementation, it's not as useful as it's sort of touted to be. And really, I think what they're why they're able to have such cheap fees and good execution currently is like they've got parallel execution, which is kind of carrying them. But there's just a lot of problems with fee markets. And if you talk to Solana builders, that's the number one thing they're kind of focused on. And there's an enormous amount of debate in that community. So, not to be a fudder, but I wouldn't be actually surprised if something ended up kind of breaking with Solana again. I don't know if that means a full liveness failure or outage, but I do think you'll start to see as more and more activity moves onto it, it's going to start to sort of shudder underneath it. And I think Solana, I don't think it'll happen this coming year. I'm front running another prediction, but I think they will have the beginnings of their 1559. I think they just need a fee market overhaul. And that's a really difficult thing to organize because it's inherently redistribution of fees and value across multiple different stakeholders. This was really difficult in Ethereum as well. But I think that's what Solana is going to need this coming year. But I think it continues to do very well, honestly.
Yeah, I think it continues to do well. It continues to I think it continues to do well to the extent that its, main application teams continue to succeed. Um, and like the bonk meme coin frenzy driving all the stablecoin transfers and volume. Like, we like Pepe was on Ethereum earlier this year. Like, those things last for like a period of months. Um, but they're just gonna have to like figure out how to get more SOL on chain. Like that's the biggest problem that we're running into right now is like a lot of the SOL is locked. A lot of the SOL is in centralized validators. Like to the extent that it's a bottleneck on DeFi activity. And so like that's kind of what's been bricking TVL. And things like NFTs are kind of differentiated and they've had like a nice 7 days versus ETH. But like what's next? And maybe it is just the price keeps going up, and that's like just like euphoria. You certainly can sustain that for longer than like a meme coin, but um, I think generally you're going to see a new group of leaders in the market, just like the leaders this year were much different than the year prior. So it'll be like a test of faith in Solana holders in some ways.
So to take this further, um, I one of the things we were talking about internally is DeFi within Solana, and I can't remember off the top of my head. I think it's about 390 something of Sol out of the five whatever is staked. So really really high staking rate. The vast majority of that is staked either through direct staking on a validator or a centralized staker. But what that limits is the use of that asset as a collateral asset. My prediction is that without Sol state moving to a liquid staking model, without it moving to less than 40% centralized state, you're not going to be able to see DeFi take off on Solana.
Stake your soul, people, in Jito, preferably.
The Jito story,
biased.
I agree.
We're bag holders.
I know. I'm biased too. I'm a minor bag holder, but I also just got to know Lucas this last year, and man, like talk about just building through an absolute shit environment where everything was going against you. Like I just personally root for that team, to be honest. So
yeah, they're clearly like the giga brains of that community. Outside of like Toli and those folks, like they like know like the physics that underpins like the blockchain. It's wild to hear them talk about it.
But just think about the comparison of DeFi kicking off in Ethereum. What was the collateral asset of choice? Well, it was ETH because no one was staking and it was proof of work. Well, now you have to do the reverse, which is instead of getting stake rate up, you have to get stake rate down and put it into a liquid staking option and use that as a collateral asset. So they've got the opposite problem to solve for DeFi to actually take off on Solana.
There might end up being sort of different market structures in Solana DeFi versus ETH DeFi that are difficult to predict now. Like one interesting example is like Jupiter, like aggregators on Solana versus ETH. So the market structure for exchanges on ETH has been Uniswap is extremely dominant. Like 1inch is done well, but like most of their volume is just Uniswap. And the reason is because of gas costs primarily. Like you have to route multiple different things, and with ETH gas costs, it's just tough. So you'd rather just trade on Uniswap where all the liquidity is. But on Solana, obviously gas cost is much less, so it makes sense to use an aggregator. And there could be weird little small things like that affect the path dependence of how market structure develops in Solana compared to Ethereum. So I'm not smart enough to predict what that would look like, but it could develop in different ways. Do you guys want to move on to Cosmos? Well, how are you guys feeling about Cosmos into 24?
It feels like Cosmos isn't even like one cohesive ecosystem anymore. I guess just like we've known it as like Atom, and that seems to have just taken a different path in terms of you've got DYDX chain, you've got Risk Harbor or Andalusia now, you've got Say, you've got I think Injective is Cosmos as well. Chain Flip is Cosmos as well. So it kind of feels just like this federation of smaller chains, and it's hard to define it as one thing, honestly. It seems to appeal more to folks who are like, we want one monolithic integrated app chain. But I think, DYDX's growth has been slower than we would have expected out of the gates. Like, I still think they've got sub 50 million in open interest. And maybe that has to do with the UI, but they've got incentives and programs to get people over. I kind of wonder, maybe it's like Noble and USDC that kind of breaks that pattern finally. But I think they're kind of like, in the same ways that people are trying to get Sol staked on these different chains, like they definitely have that dynamic in the Cosmos chains where it is like liquid staking primarily, but like they need other assets to flow onto these chains for them to be real in 2024.
Yeah. Cosmos, I think, suffers from, someone called them recently the lab of crypto, and I agree with that. There's so many ideas that come out of Cosmos that's just right, I think. I do think Cosmos suffers from this problem of being ahead of their time. Like Antonio is, I think, one of the most visionary founders. Basically, when I hear him say something along like you're directionally correct, but maybe the timeline of it is a little bit difficult. Like, I don't know. There's a whole idea of building for distribution or building for product, and you should build for product, but you shouldn't undersell distribution. And the distribution strategy has been huge for ETH. And I think ultimately their vision is correct. A lot of the value I think ends up accruing to the app layer. You need interoperability between that app layer so it feels seamless. But in the interim, it's almost like they kind of skipped to the end there. And there could have been like they missed the opportunity to make Atom just gas and a shelling point. We're missing a shelling point in Cosmos, I think.
Really tough to have Apple steal all of your ideas at Xerox Park.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
I do think generally like there's a lot of OGs of crypto in the Cosmos ecosystem. And one broader theme that we can talk about is like I think the crypto OGs have a very nice year. Just because they've been putting the most amount of work in. But like DYDX chain is like a very interesting engineering feat. I think you're right. It's just probably a little bit
Oh my
early.
God, yeah. Mm-hmm. I do think maybe if I had to make the bullish argument for Cosmos as well, is I do think there's a sequencing, which is, again, the big thing in crypto is I don't think we have many apps that have a traditional definition of product market fit. And we were talking about everything can kind of shift under the ground if there's this sort of runaway app. Maybe it's a DEX or a NFT or a game or something like that. And as soon as you do that, then the idea of paying gas, you don't really need distribution as much. And the idea of paying rent either to an ETH2 or to Solana becomes much less tenable. And then I do think you look for your own little island because you're like, I don't need distribution and I want to capture all my economics and I want perfect granularity over my product experience. And in that sense, Cosmos makes a lot of sense. I just think so I've always viewed Cosmos as kind of a really good end game, but I do have questions. It's less clear to me if Atom is going to do particularly well. Yeah, so that's
my specific prediction on Cosmos is that the applications that are built on the tech stack of Cosmos do really well, and that it's unclear as to what Cosmos, writ large does.
We should talk about themes, but like to the extent that someone has an app that has 100,000 to 1 million users, congratulations, you're like a top 5 blockchain. And so like
You are.
things can shift very quickly. And Cosmos ecosystem doesn't seem like the most application minded people. But like it's on the table for everyone. It just doesn't seem like it's going to be DeFi. Like DeFi is not the thing that can help you leapfrog to the top 10. It is something that you kind of need as a table stakes version of a blockchain to be top 10. But like gaming is how you go from like the 8th page of CoinMarketCap to, top 5. So
Cool.
Whoever focuses on that, they have a shot. Maybe it's Cosmos.
Yeah. I do. Yeah. I also just, I
Like
have
Scott
a huge
Sunarda.
soft spot. Yeah.
You never know.
We got to get Scott on the podcast at some point. He, I think is a really bright guy, and Cosmos, I love that ecosystem and I will always root for it. All right, let's go into the themes. What are some of the big themes that you guys saw? Yeah. Because the eyebrows. What do you think?
I mean, one is cliffs and unlocks. It's weird. Like in the last bull market, there were kind of like no teams really. There were no projects or like there was no cliffs that had already happened. I think the Avalanche public sale was in early 2021 or late 2020. And so the cliffs of that bear market or bull market came almost after the peak. Here we have just a lot of L2s and a lot of things like Arbitrum with a huge unlock in March and Celestia in November, December, where the market is just going to have hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars of alt supply to digest. And there was a time when unlocks were bullish. And I think the question is if people just eat these unlocks in March, I think you have a pretty good idea of what the market is going to look like. It's probably going to rip. But if it kind of struggles and we reset valuations and valuations are mimetic, people are willing to pay $1 billion for an L2 because Arbitrum's at 10. You probably see the cycle get longer and extended and things get a little bit more subdued. But I think how people deal with these unlocks is going to be a huge impact, because all of the funds that we know are focused on raising, obviously, but like a precondition to that is like heavy return money to LPs. So that's just kind of like the inside baseball of like what the venture and hedge fund people are looking at. Um, and so it'll be interesting to see if chips are taken off the table in that regard, and how that makes the market react.
Actually, kind of dovetails nicely, but one of my meta predictions is that we're going to have a reshuffling of the deck of who the best investors are. And I think that there's always been the big fundraisers, the big brands, the main characters. And we've seen a lot of those main characters get wheeled out. But I think 2024 is where we start to actually put together who's the next crop of the next generation. And it's the people that have survived. And I think that becomes more obvious as we start to see, as Vance alluded to, these funds who are out raising right now, who are needing to be able to raise, to be able to put more dollars to work, raise less, have smaller rounds, cut the size of their teams, et cetera, and kind of restructure. And so I would imagine that 2024 is a year of recognition of that.
Just to get a little saucy, do you have any predictions on how that reshuffling goes? Any this rising stars for new funds or falling angels?
We were talking about this today or yesterday. Like, there was like a few funds that like either caught the DeFi wave in a massive way, or like caught the Solana wave in a massive way, and they were up like just so much, just like yeah, and they left everyone in the dust, and like we were definitely part of that just on the DeFi side. This time around there hasn't been that like maybe like Celestia or things like that. Like we'll see kind of what it trades at during the unlock, but like you haven't seen anyone like have like the 150x fund quite yet. And so I think like dovetailing from that is, a year ago when everything was falling apart and we were buying liquid tokens, it was just like, if the industry is surviving, these tokens are going to do well. And now it's like, what is the venture meta? Is it like these monolithic L1s that people are going to bet on? Is it like, we've seen like 15 DA layers come to market in the past like 2 or 3 weeks. And so like, is it that? Is it games? Does that finally happen? But like one of these things will hit. And I think that's kind of like how you reorder the deck. And I think there's funds that are just like solid, that have a good track record, that aren't going anywhere. But if you're a venture only fund, you don't really do liquid, like you really need to be in tune with whatever that meta is. And it's not just like a narrative. Because like people can produce DA layers faster than like, the existing incumbents can build a moat. It needs to be like a real use case. And I think that's what we're still working on, frankly. We hope it's games.
What I'll add to that is I'll just do it based off of fund size. What Vance is talking about is like the sub $25 million funds in 2019, 2018, 2017, whenever they launched. Many of those did really, really well. Some of them, in the like all-time stratosphere of venture funds. I don't think that those funds this cycle are going to do as well, basically because they're competing against the multiple $100 million funds who can still play down at their level, but and take those 1,000x, 2,000x return in investments. But the smaller funds just don't have the brand to win those deals, and so I think that's where they get squeezed. I think the bigger funds, the $1 billion plus funds, or close therefore, those ones are going to have a really, really tough time returning capital. And so I think you're going to see the reshuffling happen where the early funds, the smaller ones, funds 1 and 2 that are sub 25 million, they're going to have a tough time transitioning to their next fund or their third fund, whatever it may be. And I think you're going to see, the larger funds have to, whenever they come back to market, whenever they announce, have to come back with less money.
I think that's a good prediction. I've got one for you guys, and Vance, you were just talking about a little bit. I think a big narrative that's going to be probably H1 of this year is the DA wars, but my take is that they were over before they started. I think Celestia and EigenDA have probably won the DA wars, and there's going to be quite a bit of money burned trying to catch them. And I think there's a very interesting debate on whether or not DA is a commodity or how these different DA layers are going to compete. And I would say over time, DA is a commodity and it's probably going to be sort of a race to the bottom on cost. But I don't think that's how DA layers are going to compete in the interim. I think it's going to be very much a brand thing. You're already seeing this with Celestia underneath. And probably the competition is going to heat up between EigenDA and Celestia. I think they're both going to compete first for the big ETH L2s, and probably EigenDA has a slight leg up because you can be like ETH aligned. Um, but then over time, I think Celestia ends up the battle that they need to fight is getting more new L2s to launch as sovereign rollups on Celestia as opposed to ETH L2s. But I do think the DA wars is going to be a big narrative, and I don't know. I saw some of our analysts are really bullish on Near as a DA layer for Ethereum, and I don't know. I haven't looked into it. I don't know, but I feel like the DA wars are over before they started, and it's just Celestia and EigenDA.
I just there's not enough revenue that is going to be ascribable to DA layers for it to be like a real category over the long term is my guess. But like what we've heard is that EigenLayer is significantly, or EigenDA is significantly more performant than Celestia DA and is launching in Q1. And like, if you think about like kind of like ETH being like slowly disassembled by like modular blockchain theory and all that stuff, like EigenDA and like restaking ETH is kind of like the reassembly of that. Like that's how all the pieces kind of fit back together. And like maybe the community cares or maybe not, but like, look, if you launch an L2 blockchain and you get like think about what Blast has done. Like this is a good example. They launched an L2 and they made it super ETH aligned by saying like, send us ETH and we'll like do something, with it. And like, now we have all this TVL, we have all this community versus like, congrats, you launched on Celestia. Your DA is marginally cheaper. You don't have any other real community. Like it's going to be more of a community bootstrapping mechanism in terms of like, why would I put Eigen DA over Celestia DA? And I think that's kind of what you're talking about is like, it's the brand. And that's the thing that matters. It's not like the cost or performance. Like I guess that matters, but like it's more about bootstrapping the community, which is kind of like if you had a L2 pick between a community and slightly cheaper DA, they'd pick a community.
That's
And
exactly what I'm saying. Yeah,
right.
totally. Yep.
But it's going to be
100%.
interesting. And paradoxically, like Celestia at 12 billion has a higher chance of success than Celestia at 1 billion.
I know.
So,
Even
like
though it's more
these things are
expensive,
kind of path
it's
dependent,
interesting.
but like, the rubber meets the road when the tokens unlock. And, price can drive sentiment up, but it also can deflate it on the way down. We'll see.
We shall see. And I've got one more for you on the slightly nerdier camp, but I think sort of steel sharpens steel a little bit. I think we're going to see innovation in the EVM for the first time basically ever. And I think Solana SVM is going to push. I went to one of these John Charbonneau DBA kind of research hangs, and it was very interesting to hear. I think Monad is like a really good example of this, where people are finally like, yeah, okay, we need parallel execution in the EVM. And it was actually really interesting to hear from some of the folks on the east side of the table basically articulate the idea that the EVM was designed for ETH, but the hope was that there was going to be experimentation at the execution layer on L2s. But the L2s kind of all just took the EVM and didn't innovate on it because they were focused on other stuff at the time. But I think now with the advent of the SVM, people are going to, I think it's going to be a huge trend of like parallel execution. Parallelization in the EVM is going to be a big thing to watch this coming year. Monad will be a part of that, but I think L2s will experiment with that and start to push that more. And then the other thing I think that the L2s are going to have to figure out, although I'm not really bullish on them figuring it out this year, is interop in between them. Because if the idea is to move off ETH main chain, like we got to figure out some interoperability between these layers. So
I'm pretty bullish on interop next year. Like CCIP, Socket, kind of feel like the two approaches that are winning the most users. Like Socket powers Polygon, they power Matcha, they power Coinbase internal stuff. Chainlink is kind of like synthetics, like all the DeFi protocols that use their oracles. Like I would expect by the end of next year we have that as like a solved problem. So I'm more bullish on that, and I think that's going to be a sneaky big category where it's like yeah, like you launched your own L2, but like you're playing on this shared messaging layer that like kind of is a blockchain. So like which one are you really deployed on? If your users are just doing things, this, there, and the other place, it's just like a different way to think about it.
So I agree that next year we have ideas around what's working, but I think that this is a UX issue that basically just gets better over time. I don't think it's like okay, yep, mission accomplished, we solved it. I think it's like we know who the winners are, but it slowly gets better and better and better and better every single year. Just like, HTTPS, it just like it used to be a bitch to try and connect and like switch from one network to another. And it's like, oh, you're on Juniper and you're like, no, just over time it gets abstracted more and more.
On the parallel EVM side, I think we were doing this math last night where, I mean, Michael, what are the numbers? What does the ZK EVM cost right now?
I mean, it's about $1.50 on average, so like $2.50 to swap, like I don't know, maybe $1 to send ETH, but like call it $1.50 per transaction.
Right. And then Denkun, you assume that's like,
15
maybe,
cents.
yeah, 15 cents, like maybe there's something in 2024 that helps get that to like sub 10 cents. But like, like one way to think about it, which Michael pointed out, is that's less than credit card transaction fees, which is like 30 cents plus 3% on most stuff for the merchant. But the user obviously bears that cost. And so like we're cheaper than all major mainstream payment rails, likely at scale. And I think one of the questions I have with the parallel EVM is like, do you need 0.000001 cent transactions? And if you do need that, what does that get the network? Because it certainly doesn't get a lot of fees. Like you need some sort of different use case other than like swapping and buying NFT. Like you need some high throughput use case to match high throughput TPS. So I think there's questions about like to the extent it's needed and like what are the final benchmarks we're aiming for? Does it need to be free? Because if it's free, that's not like a great business model.
Well, I'll add some color there too. So first off, I think the big difference here is 15 cents sub credit card fees for most assets. Also, that scales. So you could buy a $10 thing, you could buy $1,000 thing, and it's still going to be 15 cents. Whereas with credit card transactions, you have that variable fee baked in, which is totally different. And the other thing I'll add is a kind of abstraction, I think, changes a lot of this, where it's not the user who's paying it, it's the merchant effectively who's paying it, just as in the same way that you have person to person or point of sale transactions, not person to person, but point of sale. And so all of this leads to my broad 2024 prediction that 2024 is going to be the year of Web3 gaming, because you're going to see 50 to 100 games launch. There's going to be account abstraction to where users and gamers are not going to have to pay the transaction fees themselves. They're going to get airdrop tokens. They're going to get airdropped assets that they can use in these games. And I would go so far as to say, the NFT market at the end of next year is going to look like game assets. It's not going to be PFPs anymore. And that, is basically the broad trend of the technology is there. The wallet wall will be solved, or it kind of has been solved. Immutable passport officially announced, I think yesterday or the day before. And we've got, hundreds of games that are set to launch.
The good news about making this gaming prediction every year is that eventually we will be right.
I was going to say, I don't think we made this prediction last year.
I don't think, I'm just fucking around. Like we've just been bullish on this for a long time and underestimated how long it will take. But it does seem like finally, just like the launch of Passport yesterday and the ZK VM, like it's gonna happen. And this year is more likely than the last, and I think it will happen in 2024.
And just the last point on ZK VM and transaction fees. I think what games will realize is that it's not, all the transactions, all the movements, all the activity that lives within that game is going to be something that lives on chain. It's when you have a monetization element, that's when you have something that settles back to the blockchain. And that's where that 15 cent fee actually does come into play. Everything else will live in a semi-centralized or fully centralized ecosystem, just as you have with digital game ecosystems. but it's going to be the monetization moments that are put on chain.
I had Return of GameFi as a prediction too. I thought you guys would appreciate that one, but I also had it this year. I just feel like it feels like the obvious thing. I don't know.
Dude, it's but some people don't believe in it. Like some people are just like, this is never going to happen. It's like,
Well, I
well,
think
we're gonna be trading like dog with a hat for the next, 50 years. That doesn't sound that interesting. Like we gotta do
I'm
something
with you.
else.
I'm with you. I don't know. Look, there's this whole debate about meme coins. Are they good? Are they bad? Is speculation good or bad? And people feel the need to come out like really hard against it or really hard for it. And it's like, it's kind of cringe on both sides. Like, just take it for what
It's
it is.
so
It's just,
cringe. It's so cringe.
yeah, it's so lame to be like, this is ruining crypto or like, this is the future of social. It's like, no, it's not. It's just some intermediate thing. Just take your little gains while you do it. Have fun trading with the dog with the hat.
It's a bunch of kids on the internet that are bored as we wait for the next narrative, to come through.
100%. 100%. This is not going to be a surprise because I feel like I've talked about it on this show, but I think NFTs I think it's going to be a big comeback year for NFTs also.
Ooh, one of my dark horse bets is NFTs, PFP NFTs die in 2024.
Oh, nice. Well, there's a possibility of that happening. I do think what has been interesting for me with NFTs is you're starting to see experimentation across different business models. Like what Luca is doing on Pudgies is like, here's the thing that is absolutely 100% broken. 10,000 PFP models that monetize via basically new mints. That is a model that is never coming back. But I do think you'll see more like what Luca has done from at least my perspective is fit it into a traditional IP model. Okay, I've got my social media up here. I sell my little plushies in Walmart. And then I have my thing that sits at the bottom of the funnel and some royalties accrue to that. And that's my evangelical community that's going to scream about my Pudgies forever. That's a neat, easy, simple business model to understand. And
yeah, but that's not like, okay, that's not what I'm defining as PFP NFTs. I'm saying like the new collections that launch once every month, and we've got, hundreds of collections where you've got 10,000 per, like that is over.
Yeah, the AI effect too, where it was like hard to create those in years past. Now it's just like you can spin up a 10K PFP like when's the last time you saw anyone sell a 10K PFP collection?
We're skipping ahead to a flop, but I had a big flop on that
Let's
on
do
that
let's do
exact
the
front.
flop. Let's do the flop.
Elementals. Azuki Elementals was objectively a hysterical thing to happen, which was like this super hyped NFT collection. And everyone's like, man, I wonder what it's going to look like. And it was the exact same. That was to me.
Just they're facing the opposite direction.
And the opposite direction. And it actually was one of the only times I've ever seen crypto behave perfectly efficiently. The price went down like exactly 50% in like a day. It was amazing.
It's 50% less exciting now.
Yeah. But I don't know, Michael. I mean, I know the one thing about PFP NFTs that still makes sense to me is that people will always pay for dumb status things. And there is this really neat little viral loop of people making it their profile pictures. You're already starting to see that again. And people in especially new ecosystems, when there's just like they've made dumb money, they look to buy dumb shit. And I sort of feel like NFTs, I don't know. I feel like NFTs will make their comeback.
It may be a niche thing, but it's not going to be anything like it was last cycle. And even if we have a new cycle, I don't think, maybe it'll be like one or two collections. Maybe it'll be penguins, maybe it'll be punks, maybe it'll be bored apes, who knows? But like 2 or 3 collections that have value and maybe there's IP that's built around it. Okay, sure. But that's there. You can't have like multiple trading venues and business models around, like the massive amount of NFTs that are being created each month and people want to swap in and out of them. That's not coming back.
I do think punks will hit a new all-time high. Same with like Fidenzas. Like I think there's like very unique, interesting assets. Where I disagree if NFTs coming back is I don't think that is enough for OpenSea to be like, a $10 billion business again.
No comment on OpenSea specifically. That's a challenge. Yeah, I never like to root against anyone. Like they were the underdogs. They built it into a crazy business. It's a really smart team. I'm sure they'll figure something out. But yeah, I think they're gonna have to figure something else out. Yeah,
just the high watermark for NFTs. Like like we like the OpenSea team. It's just like it. They have a great product. It's just they're not going to be selling the same thing.
It's going
It's
to be
not going to be
tricky.
DFT.
And anecdotally, the games that are building NFTs that'll have at least in-game utility, none of them. I mean, maybe some of the high-value assets, they're like, sure, you can put it on OpenSea if you want, but like, we want to control the marketplace for our game. Like the disintermediation of marketplaces for NFTs is going to be the other big kind of sub trend here.
Interesting. Yeah. I guess you saw a little bit of that with Axie and their own marketplace, data marketplace too, for that reason.
We didn't get to it, but flops of 2023. Michael Lewis.
Dude, that was my biggest loser. I had him as
book
my biggest
sucked.
loser. Jesus. I mean, he just lit his
Multiple
whole
L's,
reputation on
too.
fire too. Like, why?
Like
We didn't touch
doubling
on
down multiple times.
Yeah.
Imagine looking at SBF and being like, this is the horse I'm going to back. I don't understand how he came to that conclusion. So he was my biggest loser for 2023.
I'm trying to think of my biggest loser for 2023. It's no one in particular, but I think about this kind of every cycle. Like people who sold the bottom and like didn't come back. Like the mental agony of watching something rip in your face is just excruciating. And it's like it's a
Brutality.
religious experience, And oftentimes those people don't come back to crypto because it's just too much. And so, you don't hear about these stories as much as you do about the guy who made, $1 million from a dog with a hat or whatever. But like we left a lot of people behind in 2022 and, RIP.
RIP. I've got another flop actually. The party that Bored Ape Yacht Club hosted where they burned those people's eyes out with the wrong lights.
Dude, I was like, this can't be serious. And it was.
It was. Yeah. Tough luck.
Makes you think.
What about biggest winners for this year?
Probably Sol and Jito.
I was gonna say Solana, but in particular person, probably Anatoly.
Yeah. Probably Toly. I also think the builders won this year. It feels like the people who are left have very strong degrees of clarity about what to build. And like that's going to manifest over the next year. So like the people who stuck with it really did well. The people who rotated to AI, that might be another big flop. It's seriously tough sledding in AI land right now. Like maybe not quite the bear market that crypto is going through, but big companies are winning, but everybody else is kind of getting crushed. There's a lot of YC companies that went off and trudged up that hill.
Someone should make the Calcanus inverse ETF same way that they did with that call to pivot to AI was like that's got to be the exact bottom. That was just
it was that and the ECB calling for Bitcoin to go to zero. Like those are the two tweets that it was like, if we're not back now, we should be at some point.
I had another one. This was kind of the obvious one would be Coinbase and Brian.
Yeah.
Like
That
guy has eaten glass for so many cycles. And I mean, going into this bear market, it was like they have way too many people. They haven't shipped a good product in forever. And then they just like chopped their head count, reduced their loss. They shipped base. They're doing all this stuff that just makes an enormous amount of sense. And it just feels like no one has been positioned better. Like from a sense, like they're awesome. I just like so root for that team. So they've got the exchange business base, interest with Circle. They've got staking. They're just murdering it on all fronts. So
Jesse Pollock too is a big part of that. And it feels like he's been kind of like the MVP. I mean, like obviously Brian is the CEO and the guy who's calling the shots, but like Jesse has been the loyal foot soldier, lieutenant, whatever you want to call him. And he's like, I saw him at the Build on Base, Miami, Art Basel. Like he was doing a stream there. He's like buying stuff on chain. He's like an avatar for what crypto could be. And I think it's just like cool to see like the next generation of folks step up and start leading.
Yep.
Agreed. Well, I already called it out a little bit. Actually, one other group I wanted to give a shout out to was Udi and Eric on just ordinals, or Taproot Wizards and Casey, I guess, at ordinals too. Like it takes a really special type of person to be like, this thing is great. it's been sort of co-opted by a very religious community of people that are just going to yell at me and not thank me for what I'm doing, but I'm going to do it anyway. And yeah, I thought that was a very cool win for the year too. But
Tough to do battles with the lunatics,
yeah, I agree.
but they took them head on. So definite winner.
One more prediction for 2024. The DeFi 1.0 founders have a massive comeback tour.
I heartily agree with that. Yep.
Yeah, bolstered by new young, like all the Blockworks guys are in the synthetics community, which like we found out like this year they've got like a new group of core contributors. Like Maker kind of has the same thing. Aave is having a resurgence. And then
I'd
there's
say
like
Uni
some cool ones.
as
Yeah,
well.
Uni, exactly.
There's also some cool ones like Sparkland, which is like kind of come out of nowhere, but is also part of the Maker ecosystems. Like I think their ecosystems will do well also, and that's kind of like the super contrarian. Like a lot of those are like 10 or 100 million micro cap coins, which are similar to the dog hat, themes, just small enough for other people trying to turn 1,000 into $10,000.
And I just respect them. Like they have been in one of the toughest. I mean, that's got to be one of the toughest business models ever across extreme volatility. I just have so much respect for those guys. So appreciate all you builders out there. And I know we got to wrap it up here, but guys, it's been another fun year. Yeah, guys, this is a lot of fun to do. So I just appreciate you guys and Framework, and this has been an awesome relationship from Jason, my perspective.
Yeah.
So appreciate you guys.
Thanks everyone for listening this year. Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, Kwanzaa, whatever you celebrate. 2024. Let's get it.
Yeah, exactly. Thanks everyone.
Peace, guys.